The rain hammered against Mike Davidson's workshop windows like bullets from heaven when his phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Mr. Davidson, this is Richard Blackstone." The voice was cold, calculated, dripping with the kind of power that could destroy lives with a signature. Mike's blood turned to ice as he recognized the name Kate's billionaire ex-fiancé, the man she'd fled from in the storm 3 weeks ago. "I know Catherine is there, playing house with you and your daughter," Blackstone continued, his words sharp as daggers. "And I'm going to make this very simple. She comes back to me, or I destroy everything you've ever loved. Your home, your business, your daughter's school. I can make this entire town disappear." Mike looked across his shop at Kate, saw the terror in her green eyes as she realized her past had finally caught up with them. In 48 hours, they would lose everything unless Kate sacrificed herself to save the people she'd grown to love. But sometimes, the most dangerous storms reveal the strongest foundations. Like this video if you believe love conquers all. And subscribe for more incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. The October rain hammered against the windows of Davidson's auto repair like bullets from heaven, each drop carrying the weight of another unpaid bill, another sleepless night, another day closer to losing everything. Michael Davidson stood in the doorway of his small shop, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag that had seen better decades, watching the storm transform Main Street into a river of regret. At 42, Mike had the kind of face that told stories, deep lines around gray-blue eyes that had seen too much loss, calloused hands that worked 18-hour days, and shoulders that carried the weight of being both mother and father to an 8-year-old girl who deserved so much more than he could give her. "Daddy, the lights are flickering again." Emma's voice cut through the rain symphony. She appeared in the doorway connecting the shop to their small apartment above, her dark curls escaping from a ponytail that had given up hours ago. In her arms, she clutched a worn teddy bear that had been Sarah's last gift before the cancer took her 3 years ago. Mike forced a smile, the kind he'd perfected for moments when the world felt like it was crumbling, but his daughter needed to believe everything was fine. "Just the storm, sweetheart. Old buildings and new rain don't always get along." Emma stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the concrete floor. At 8, she had an uncanny ability to read the worry lines on his face like a map of their struggles. "Mrs. Henderson brought us another casserole today, tuna and green beans." "That's kind of her." Mike closed the shop door and locked it, though he couldn't remember the last time anyone had tried to break into a business that barely broke even. "You finish your homework?" "Mostly." Emma followed him toward the stairs leading to their apartment. "I need help with the math problems, the ones with fractions." Mike's chest tightened. Sarah had been the one good at math, the one who could explain fractions and long division with patience and creativity. He could rebuild an engine blindfolded, but fourth-grade arithmetic felt like advanced calculus when you were running on 3 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. "After dinner," he promised, ruffling her hair. "We'll figure it out together." Their apartment was small but clean, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that doubled as a dining room, and a living room where the couch had been strategically positioned to hide the stain on the carpet where Sarah had spilled grape juice during her last good day. The walls were covered with Emma's artwork and school photos, creating a gallery of childhood that made the space feel bigger than its square footage suggested. Mike moved to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, surveying their options with the strategic mind of a general planning a campaign. Leftover pizza from Tuesday, Mrs. Henderson's casserole, and a carton of milk that would expire tomorrow. The bills spread across the kitchen table told their own story: electricity past due, rent notice, and a hospital bill from Emma's strep throat last month that made his stomach clench every time he looked at it. The medical debt from Sarah's treatment still haunted them like a ghost that demanded monthly payments. Even with insurance, even with payment plans, even with the church fundraiser that had helped for a few months, the numbers never seemed to get smaller. Some nights, Mike lay awake calculating how many brake jobs he'd need to complete to keep the lights on, how many oil changes would pay for Emma's school supplies, how many miracles it would take to give his daughter the life she deserved. "The casserole smells good," Emma said, climbing onto one of the kitchen chairs that wobbled unless you sat just right. Mrs. Henderson asked if we need anything else. I told her we're fine. Mike glanced at his daughter, pride and heartbreak warring in his chest. Emma had learned too young to deflect charity with polite smiles, to pretend their struggles were temporary inconveniences rather than the grinding reality of single parenthood on a mechanic's salary. We are fine, he said, meaning it as much as he could. They had each other. They had a roof over their heads. And they had more love in their small apartment than some mansions would ever hold. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he married Sarah fresh out of high school, when they dreamed of a house with a white picket fence and enough bedrooms for the 3 kids they'd hoped to have. But it was their life, and he'd fight for every piece of it. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows and making Emma jump. Mike moved to the window and peered out at the street, where the rain had turned the potholes into small lakes. The streetlight in front of their building flickered like a dying star, casting intermittent shadows across the empty road. That's when he saw her. A figure moved through the rain, stumbling rather than walking, clutching something against her chest. Even through the downpour, Mike could see she was in trouble. Her movements were unsteady. Her posture spoke of exhaustion or injury, and she had no umbrella, no protection against the storm that had turned Millbrook's quiet streets into a war zone. Stay here, Mike told Emma, grabbing his jacket from the hook by the door. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Emma's voice carried a note of panic that she tried to hide. Since Sarah's death, any absence felt like a potential abandonment. Any goodbye carried the weight of permanence. Just downstairs for a minute, lock the door behind me. Mike descended the narrow staircase that led to the shop's back entrance, his footsteps echoing in the small space. Through the glass door, he could see the woman more clearly now. She stood under the broken streetlight, swaying slightly, her dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain. Her clothes, what he could see of them, looked expensive, out of place in their working-class neighborhood where designer anything was as rare as winning lottery tickets. He opened the door and stepped into the storm. The rain hit him like a physical force, soaking through his jacket in seconds. Ma'am, you all right? She turned toward his voice, and Mike felt something shift in his chest, even drenched and obviously exhausted. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost ethereal: high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that reflected the streetlight like pools of green water. But it was the vulnerability in her expression that made him step closer. The way she held herself like someone who had been running for so long she'd forgotten how to stop. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I didn't know where else to go. Mike looked around the empty street, then back at her. She was alone, carrying what appeared to be a small overnight bag, and clearly in some kind of distress. Every instinct Sarah had helped him develop as a father and husband kicked in. This was someone who needed help. And in Millbrook. You helped your neighbors, even if you'd never met them before. You hurt, he asked, stepping closer, but keeping his distance, aware that a strange man approaching a vulnerable woman in the dark might be more frightening than helpful. She shook her head, then seemed to reconsider. Not physically, not anymore. The words carried implications that made Mike's jaw tighten. He'd heard that tone before, in Sarah's voice when she talked about her father, in the careful way some of his customers' wives spoke about their husbands. It was the sound of someone who had learned to measure their words, to hide bruises that might not show on the surface. Look, Mike said, raising his voice to be heard over the thunder. I don't know what's going on, but standing in this storm isn't going to help anything. Why don't you come inside, get dry, figure out your next move? She stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something trustworthiness. Perhaps, or kindness, or simply the absence of threat. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once and stepped toward the door. Mike led her up the narrow staircase, acutely aware of the contrast between her obvious elegance and their modest surroundings. The stairs creaked under their feet, a sound he'd grown so accustomed to that he barely noticed it anymore. But now, seeing their home through a stranger's eyes, he felt a flash of embarrassment about the chipped paint, the worn carpet, the general shabbiness that came from making do with what you had. Emma met them at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of wariness. She'd learned to be cautious around strangers, another lesson no 8-year-old should need to master. Emma, this is... Mike realized he didn't know the woman's name. Catherine, she said softly, crouching down to Emma's eye level despite her soaked clothes. But you can call me Kate if you want. Emma studied her with the intense scrutiny only children could manage. You're really wet, Kate smiled, and the expression transformed her face from merely beautiful to something approaching radiant. I got caught in the storm. Daddy helps people who get caught in storms, Emma announced with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who had been raised to believe in the fundamental goodness of helping others. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's car when it broke down in the rain, and he helped Mr. Garcia move his furniture when his back was hurt. Mike felt heat rise in his cheeks. Emma, why don't you get Kate a towel? The big one from the bathroom. As Emma scampered away, Mike turned to Kate, taking in the details he'd missed in the urgency of getting her out of the storm. Her coat was indeed expensive wool, well-tailored, the kind of garment that cost more than he made in a month. Her jeans were designer, her boots Italian leather. Everything about her spoke of money, of a world where rain was an inconvenience rather than a crisis that could ruin your only good clothes. Nice kid, Kate said, wrapping her arms around herself as she shivered. She's everything, Mike replied without thinking, then felt embarrassed by the honesty of it. Emma returned with the towel and handed it to Kate with the solemnity of a sacred ritual. Kate accepted it with equal gravity, wrapping it around her shoulders like a royal robe. Thank you, she said to Emma. This helps a lot. Mike gestured toward the kitchen table, moving the stack of bills to one side with a casual motion that he hoped looked natural rather than desperate. Sit down. I'll make some coffee. That's very kind, but I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, Mike interrupted, already moving toward the coffee maker. It was an old machine, a wedding gift from Sarah's mother that had survived longer than the marriage it had celebrated. Emma, why don't you show Kate your art project while I get this started? Emma brightened immediately, rushing to the refrigerator where her latest masterpiece was displayed with the kind of pride usually reserved for gallery exhibitions. It was a drawing of their family herself, Mike, and a figure that could have been Sarah or simply the idealized mother every child carried in their imagination. This is us, Emma explained to Kate, pointing to each figure in turn. That's Daddy, that's me, and that's Mommy. She lives in heaven now, but she still watches us. Kate's expression softened as she studied the drawing. It's beautiful. Emma, you're a very talented artist. Daddy says I get it from Mommy. She used to draw pictures of flowers and birds and things. He keeps them in a box in his closet. Mike felt his throat tighten. The box Emma mentioned contained more than just Sarah's drawings, love letters from their courtship, photos from their honeymoon, the ultrasound picture from Emma's first doctor's visit, and the journal Sarah had kept during her final months, filled with letters to Emma for birthdays and graduations and wedding days Sarah would never see. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with its familiar domestic rhythm. Mike pulled 3 mugs from the cabinet, then hesitated and put one back. Emma was too young for coffee, and somehow the gesture of offering it to Kate felt like an acknowledgement of adulthood, of serious conversations that lay ahead. So, Mike said as he poured the coffee, you want to tell me how you ended up on our street in the middle of a storm? Kate accepted the mug with hands that trembled slightly, whether from cold or something else. Mike couldn't tell. She wrapped her fingers around the ceramic, using it to warm her hands as she considered her answer. It's complicated, she said finally. Mike sat down across from her, noting the way she held herself even in his kitchen straight posture. Careful movements, the unconscious elegance of someone who had been taught from childhood how to carry herself in any situation. Most things worth talking about are... Emma climbed into the chair beside Kate, apparently fascinated by this stranger who had appeared like a character from one of her fairy tales. Are you a princess? She asked with the directness only children possessed. Kate's laugh was soft but genuine. Not exactly, sweetheart. Anna, but you're really pretty, and your clothes are fancy, and you talk like someone on TV. Mike winced. Emma, that's not... It's fine, Kate interrupted, smiling at Emma. You're very observant. I suppose I am a little different from most people around here. The admission hung in the air like a challenge or a confession. Mike studied Kate's face, noting the exhaustion beneath the carefully applied makeup, the way her eyes darted toward the window as if she expected someone to appear out of the storm. Different how? He asked gently. Kate was quiet for so long that Mike thought she might not answer. Outside, the storm continued its assault on Millbrook, but inside their small kitchen, the silence felt intimate and heavy with possibility. I left someone tonight, Kate said finally. Someone I should have left a long time ago. The words carried weight, and Mike felt the familiar clench in his stomach that came from recognizing pain in another person. He'd felt it with Sarah during her illness, with Emma during the difficult months after her mother's death, with himself every morning when he looked in the mirror and wondered if he was enough. Someone who hurt you. The question came out harsher than he'd intended, but the thought of anyone raising a hand to this woman made something protective and primal surge in his chest. Kate nodded, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Not the way you might think, but yes, he hurt me, in ways that matter more than bruises. Emma, with the intuitive wisdom of children, seemed to sense the gravity of the conversation. She slipped from her chair and moved to stand beside Kate, placing a small hand on her arm in a gesture of comfort that made Mike's heart ache with pride. Daddy says people who hurt other people are just sad inside, Emma offered. But that doesn't make it okay. Kate looked down at Emma with surprise and something that might have been wonder. Your daddy sounds very wise. He is. Emma agreed with the absolute certainty of a child who had never had reason to doubt her father's wisdom. He says when people are mean, it's usually because they're scared or sad, but we still don't have to let them be mean to us. Mike felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with pride. The words Emma quoted were ones he'd used to explain her grandfather's drinking, her mother's occasional sharp words during the worst days of her illness, and the casual cruelty of children who didn't understand why Emma's clothes came from thrift stores and her shoes were held together with careful stitching rather than replaced when they wore out. Emma's right, Mike said. You don't have to let anyone hurt you, no matter what their reasons are. Kate's eyes met his across the table, and for a moment, Mike felt like he could see past the elegant facade to something raw and honest underneath. She was beautiful. Yes, but more than that. She was real in a way that had nothing to do with her expensive clothes or carefully styled hair. I don't have anywhere to go, Kate admitted. I know that sounds pathetic, but I just started driving. And when the storm got bad, I pulled over. I saw your light and thought... She trailed off, shaking her head. I don't know what I thought. That maybe someone kind lived here. Someone kind does live here, Emma announced with the absolute conviction of youth. Daddy's the kindest person in the whole world. He helps everybody. Mike felt his face heat up. Emma, why don't you go get ready for bed? It's past your bedtime. But I want to talk to Kate, Emma protested. She's interesting. She'll still be interesting tomorrow, Mike said. Though he wasn't sure if that was true, there was something about Kate that felt temporary, like a beautiful bird that might fly away the moment the storm cleared. Emma sighed with the dramatic flair of a child forced to accept the unfairness of adult decisions. But she hugged Kate goodnight, a gesture that surprised them both, and headed toward her bedroom. Brush your teeth, Mike called after her. I know, Emma called back, her voice carrying the exasperated patience of a child who had been reminded of the same task every night of her life. With Emma gone, the kitchen felt different, more intimate, charged with the possibility of honest conversation between adults who had both learned that life was more complicated than fairy tales suggested. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, Mike said, but if you need a place to stay tonight, we've got a couch. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. Kate stared at him like he just offered her $1 million. You would do that for a complete stranger, Mike shrugged, feeling self-conscious under her intense gaze. Stranger or not, nobody should be out in this storm. And Emma's right, we help people when we can. Even when you clearly don't have much to spare. The observation was gentle but pointed, and Mike realized she'd noticed the bills on the table. The careful way he'd portioned out the coffee, the general sense of making do that permeated their small apartment. Especially then, he said. Sarah, my wife, she used to say that, when you don't have much. Sharing what you do have matters more, not less. Kate's expression softened at the mention of Sarah. Emma said she lives in heaven now. Mike nodded, surprised by how easily he could talk about it with this stranger when he still struggled to find words for Emma's questions about why Mommy couldn't come back. Cancer, 3 years ago. It was hard. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but Kate said them with a sincerity that made them feel like more than the usual platitudes people offered when they didn't know what else to say. She would have liked you, Mike said, then felt embarrassed by the assumption. She always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they talk to kids. Emma doesn't trust easily, but she took to you right away. Kate smiled, and Mike noticed that this smile was different from the one she'd given Emma, less guarded, more vulnerable. She's special. You both are. The compliment hit Mike in a place he hadn't realized was still tender. Since Sarah's death, he'd become so focused on survival, on keeping Emma fed and housed and happy, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something more than just a struggling single father. So, he said, clearing his throat, you want to talk about what happened tonight? Sometimes it helps to say it out loud. Kate was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Outside, the storm seemed to be intensifying, but inside their small kitchen, the silence felt safe and warm. His name is Richard, Kate said finally. Richard Blackstone. We've been together for 2 years, engaged for 6 months. Everyone thought I was so lucky he's successful, handsome, charming when he wants to be. But, she paused, struggling with the words. But Mike prompted gently. But he doesn't see me. He sees what I represent, what marrying me would give him. And I realized tonight that I was about to spend the rest of my life being someone's trophy instead of someone's partner. Mike felt a surge of anger toward this Richard Blackstone. Whoever he was, the idea of reducing Kate to a trophy seemed not just wrong, but incomprehensible. Even in the short time he'd known her, Mike could see that she was intelligent, kind, genuinely interested in others' qualities that should matter more than whatever superficial advantages she might bring to a relationship. What made you realize it? He asked. Kate's laugh was bitter. He threw a party tonight, our engagement party. 300 people, all the right names, all the right faces, and I stood there in a dress that cost more than most people make in a month, listening to him give a speech about how I was going to be the perfect wife for someone in his position. And I couldn't do it anymore. Mike tried to imagine the kind of life she was describing: engagement parties with 300 guests, dresses that cost thousands of dollars. A world where marriage was discussed in terms of position and advantage rather than love and partnership. It was so foreign to his experience that it might as well have been a story from another planet. So you left. I walked right out of my own engagement party, Kate said, and there was a note of wonder in her voice, as if she still couldn't quite believe she'd done it. I didn't even change clothes. I just got in my car and started driving. Mike looked at her again, taking in the expensive dress she wore under her coat, the careful styling that was now disheveled from the rain. She had literally walked away from a life of luxury to stand in a storm on his street. And somehow that act of courage made her even more beautiful than she'd been when she first appeared. Do you regret it? He asked. Kate considered the question seriously, her green eyes distant as she weighed her answer. I regret waiting so long to do it. I regret all the times I talked myself into staying because leaving seemed too hard, too complicated, but walking away, no. I don't regret that. Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom. She was singing softly to herself, a lullaby Sarah used to hum during bedtime routines. The sound filled Mike with the familiar mix of love and loss that had become the soundtrack of his life as a single parent. She has a beautiful voice, Kate observed. Gets that from her mother, too, Mike said. Sarah could sing anything, church hymns, rock songs, made up lullabies that Emma still remembers word for word. It must be hard, raising her alone. Mike nodded, surprised by how easy it was to talk to Kate about things he usually kept locked away. Some days are harder than others. The practical stuff, cooking, cleaning, homework that I can handle. It's the other things that get me, like when she asks questions about growing up, about boys, about why some kids have moms and she doesn't. I do my best, but you're just one person trying to do the job of two, Kate finished. Something like that. Mike drained his coffee mug, using the action to cover the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. It wasn't often that someone understood the weight he carried without him having to explain it. You're doing better than you think, Kate said softly. I can see it in the way she looks at you, the way she talks about you. That little girl adores you. The words hit Mike like a physical blow, not painful, but powerful enough to knock him off balance. He'd spent so many nights lying awake wondering if he was enough. If Emma would grow up feeling like she'd been cheated out of the mother she deserved. If his best efforts would ever be sufficient. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. That means more than you know. Kate smiled, and this time the expression was soft and understanding. Sometimes we all need to hear that we're doing okay. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, broken only by the continued assault of rain against the windows and the distant sound of Emma's singing. Mike found himself studying Kate's face in the soft kitchen light, noting the way exhaustion and relief warred in her expression, the way she seemed to be gradually relaxing for the first time since she'd appeared on his doorstep. I should let you get some rest, Kate said eventually. You probably have work tomorrow, and I've already imposed enough. You haven't imposed, Mike assured her. And yes, I work tomorrow, but not until 8. The couch is yours if you want it. I can get you some blankets. Maybe find you something dry to wear. Kate's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. You don't even know me. I know enough, Mike said simply. I know you're kind to children. You're brave enough to walk away from something that was hurting you. And you're sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee instead of trying to hurt me or steal my TV. That's enough for one night, Kate laughed, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Your standards for house guests are refreshingly low. My standards for people are pretty simple, Mike corrected. Treat others with kindness, especially kids and people who can't defend themselves. Everything else is just details. Mike stood and moved to the linen closet, pulling out sheets and blankets that were clean, if not luxurious, as he arranged them on the couch. He was acutely aware of Kate watching him, and he found himself moving with more care than usual, as if her presence had made him more conscious of his own actions. The bathroom's down the hall, he said, pointing toward the narrow corridor that led to their single bathroom. I'll see if I can find you something to sleep in that's not quite so. He gestured vaguely at her expensive dress. Inappropriate for sleeping on a stranger's couch, Kate suggested with a small smile. I was going to say fancy, but that works too. Mike disappeared into his bedroom and returned with an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that had belonged to Sarah. He'd kept some of her clothes, unable to bring himself to donate everything, and now he was grateful for the impulse. These should fit okay, he said, handing them to Kate. The shirt's mine, but the pants were my wife's. She was about your size. Kate accepted the clothes with the reverence usually reserved for precious gifts. Are you sure I don't want to? She would have wanted them to go to someone who needed them, Mike interrupted. And she would have been the first person to offer you a place to stay. Kate looked down at the clothes in her hands, then back at Mike. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay this kindness. You don't need to repay anything. Just get some rest, and we'll figure out tomorrow when it gets here. Kate nodded and headed toward the bathroom, pausing at the doorway to look back at him. Mike, you're a good man. Your daughter is lucky to have you. After she disappeared into the bathroom, Mike stood in his living room arranging and rearranging the blankets on the couch, his mind racing with questions about the woman who had appeared in his life, like something out of a dream. There was something about Kate that didn't quite add up: the expensive clothes, The cultured accent, the way she carried herself spoke of a world far removed from Millbrook's working-class reality. But there was also something genuine about her, something that resonated with the part of him that had learned to recognize authenticity in the midst of loss and struggle. She had talked to Emma like a real person, rather than a cute accessory, had listened to his stories about Sarah without offering empty platitudes, had accepted his simple hospitality with grace rather than condescension. Emma appeared in her pajamas, hair damp from her own quick wash. "Is Kate staying?" "Just for tonight," Mike said, though something in his chest hoped it might be longer. "Good," Emma pronounced with the satisfaction of someone whose sense of justice had been served. "She looks sad, like you did after Mommy went to heaven." Mike felt his breath catch. Sometimes Emma's observations cut straight to the heart of things with surgical precision. "What made you think that?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all matters of emotion and fairness. Her eyes, they looked like they missed something important. Mike knelt down to Emma's level, struck once again by his daughter's intuitive understanding of human nature. "You're very smart, you know that." Emma grinned. "Mommy always said I got the smart from both of you, so I got extra." The bathroom door opened, and Kate emerged wearing Sarah's clothes. The transformation was startling. Gone was the elegant sophistication of her expensive dress, replaced by the simple comfort of cotton and flannel. But somehow, she looked more beautiful this way, more real and approachable. "Much better," she said, smoothing down the t-shirt. "Thank you again." Emma studied Kate's new appearance with the critical eye of a fashion consultant. "You look more like us now." Kate smiled. "Is that good or bad?" "Good," Emma declared. "You looked too fancy before, like you might break if someone hugged you too hard." Mike felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Emma, that's not." "It's okay." Kate laughed. "She's right. I probably did look pretty breakable." Emma yawned, a jaw-cracking expression of exhaustion that reminded Mike how far past her bedtime they'd ventured. "All right, kiddo. Time for bed. For real this time." "Will Kate be here in the morning?" Emma asked as Mike guided her toward her bedroom. Mike glanced at Kate, who was settling onto the couch with the careful movements of someone trying not to impose even while accepting help. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's up to Kate." "I hope she stays for breakfast," Emma said, loud enough for Kate to hear. "Daddy makes really good pancakes on Saturdays." "Emma," Mike warned, but Kate smiled. "I'd like that very much," Kate said, "if your daddy doesn't mind." Emma beamed with the triumph of a successful matchmaker, kissed Mike goodnight, and disappeared into her room with the satisfied air of someone whose work was done. Mike turned off most of the lights, leaving only the small lamp by the couch for Kate. "You need anything else, water? Extra blanket?" "I'm fine," Kate assured him, but her voice was soft with exhaustion and something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you, Mike, for all of it." "Sleep well," Mike said, heading toward his own bedroom. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at Kate, who was curled on his couch in his dead wife's clothes, looking more at peace than she had when she'd first appeared on his doorstep. "Kate," he said softly. "Yes. Whatever you're running from, whatever made you leave tonight, you did the right thing. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most important ones." Kate's smile was barely visible in the dim light, but Mike could hear it in her voice when she replied, "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear." Mike closed his bedroom door and leaned against it, his mind spinning with the events of the evening, in the space of a few hours. His orderly, if difficult life had been turned upside down by a woman who had appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer he hadn't realized he'd been saying. As he lay in bed listening to the rain finally begin to soften against his windows, Mike found himself thinking not about the bills that waited on his kitchen table or the long day of work that awaited him tomorrow, but about the way Kate had looked at Emma with genuine interest and affection rather than the patronizing attention most adults gave to children. He thought about the grace with which she'd accepted his simple offer of help, the honesty with which she'd shared her story, the courage it must have taken to walk away from a life of luxury and security. Most of all, he thought about the way she'd made him feel like himself again, Not just Emma's father or Sarah's widower, or the guy who fixed cars to pay bills that never seemed to get smaller, but Mike Davidson, a man capable of being seen and appreciated for who he was rather than what he could provide. It was a dangerous feeling. He knew Kate belonged to a different world, one where engagement parties had 300 guests and dresses, cost more than he made in a month. Tomorrow, she would probably remember who she was and where she came from, and she would disappear back into that world as suddenly as she had emerged from it. But tonight, she was sleeping on his couch in Sarah's old clothes, and for the first time in 3 years, Mike fell asleep to the sound of someone else's breathing in his house. Someone who wasn't Emma. Someone who made the small space feel less lonely and more like a home where good things might still be possible. Outside, the storm finally exhausted itself and moved on, leaving behind the fresh, clean scent of rain-washed air and the promise of a new day. And in the small apartment above Davidson's auto repair, three people who had been strangers that morning slept peacefully, connected by the kind of unexpected kindness that sometimes arrives exactly when it's needed most. Carried on the wind like a gift from heaven or a reminder that even in the darkest storms, there are still lights burning in the windows of people who believe in helping others find their way home. Mike woke to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes, which was impossible because he was the one who made breakfast in this house. And he was still lying in bed watching pale October sunlight filter through his bedroom curtains. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the soft sounds of movement in his kitchen, trying to reconcile the domestic symphony with his memory of the previous night. Then it all came rushing back, the storm, the woman on his doorstep, Kate curled on his couch in Sarah's old clothes. He sat up quickly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process the reality of having a stranger in his home. A beautiful stranger who had walked away from her own engagement party and somehow ended up drinking coffee at his kitchen table. The clock on his nightstand read 7:15 a.m., which meant he'd slept better than he had in months. Usually, he was awake by 6, lying in the gray pre-dawn light and mentally cataloging the day's challenges, which bills needed to be paid, which customers he could call about overdue accounts, whether Emma's shoes would last another month or if he needed to start shopping the thrift stores again. But this morning felt different, lighter somehow, as if the storm had washed away more than just the dust from Millbrook streets. Mike pulled on jeans and a clean t-shirt, then made his way to the kitchen, where he found a scene that made him stop in the doorway. Kate stood at his stove, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing Sarah's old robe over the clothes he'd given her the night before. She moved around his kitchen with surprising confidence, flipping pancakes with the ease of someone who actually knew how to cook. Emma sat at the table, already dressed for the day, chattering away about something with the animated enthusiasm she usually reserved for Christmas morning or trips to the library. On the table, Mike could see 2 plates already filled with perfectly golden pancakes, and the coffee maker was brewing what smelled like much better coffee than he usually managed to produce. "Morning," Kate said when she noticed him in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind." Emma said you usually make pancakes on Saturday, but she also said you don't get to sleep in very often, so I thought I'd return the favor. Mike blinked, still processing the domestic scene before him. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Kate said simply. "Besides, Emma's been telling me all about your pancake technique. Apparently, I have a lot to learn." Emma giggled. "Kate's pancakes are really good, but yours are still the best. Daddy." Mike felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee Kate poured for him and everything to do with the easy way she'd fit herself into their morning routine. There was something surreal about watching this elegant woman who last night had been wearing a dress worth more than his monthly rent, standing in his modest kitchen, making breakfast for his daughter. "Sleep okay?" he asked, accepting the coffee mug with hands that felt clumsy in her presence. "Better than I have in months," Kate admitted. "Your couch is surprisingly comfortable." "It should be. It cost me 3 months of payments," Mike said, then immediately regretted the comment. He had a habit of mentioning money troubles without thinking. a side effect of living so close to the financial edge that every purchase was a calculated risk. But Kate didn't seem bothered by the admission. If anything, her expression softened with something that might have been understanding. Sometimes the most comfortable things are the ones we appreciate most because we know what they cost. The observation was surprisingly profound, and Mike found himself studying Kate's face more carefully. There was something in her expression, a knowledge of value that went beyond price tags, an appreciation for things that couldn't be measured in dollars. Emma, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult conversation, was busy cutting her pancakes into precise geometric shapes. Kate knows how to make them fluffy, she announced. She said it's all about not mixing the batter too much. Is that so? Mike sat down at the table, acutely aware of Kate's proximity as she moved around the kitchen. What other cooking secrets do you know? Kate laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the entire room. More than you might expect and fewer than I should. I spent most of my life eating in restaurants or having other people cook for me, but I've been learning. There was something wistful in her voice, a note of regret or loss that made Mike wonder about the life she'd left behind. What kind of world had she come from where other people always did the cooking? And why had she been learning to cook for herself? Why were you learning? Emma asked with the directness that made Mike both proud and occasionally embarrassed. Kate paused in her pancake flipping, considering the question. Because I realized I didn't know how to take care of myself in the ways that really matter. I could plan business meetings and organize charity events, but I couldn't make a simple meal or feel comfortable in my own kitchen. It seemed like something important to learn. Mike felt a flicker of curiosity about those business meetings and charity events, but before he could ask, Emma was launching into a detailed explanation of all the things she thought Kate should learn to cook, complete with offers to teach her the right way to make grilled cheese sandwiches and her famous to an audience of 1 chocolate chip cookies. Kate listened with the same attention she might have given to a business presentation, asking questions and making mental notes as if Emma's culinary advice was the most important information she'd received in years. Watching them together, Mike felt something shift in his chest, not just attraction, though that was certainly there, but something deeper. Kate talked to Emma like she mattered, like her opinions and ideas were worth considering, rather than simply tolerated because she was cute. After breakfast, Kate insisted on washing dishes while Mike got ready for work. He moved through his usual routine, checking his schedule, gathering his tools, making sure Emma had everything she needed for her day at Mrs. Patterson's house. But he found himself distracted by the sound of Kate and Emma's conversation, drifting from the kitchen. Do you have to go to work today? Emma was asking. I don't have a job right now, Kate admitted. I left my old one when I left everything else. What kind of job did you have? Mike paused in his gathering of work clothes, curious about Kate's answer. I helped run a company, Kate said carefully. We bought and sold buildings, helped people find places to live and work. That sounds important. I thought it was, but sometimes what seems important from the outside isn't what matters most. Mike felt a chill of recognition. Kate's vague description of her work, combined with her expensive clothes and cultured accent, was starting to paint a picture of someone from a very different world than Millbrook's blue-collar reality. Real estate, especially at the level she seemed to be describing, was a business that dealt in millions of dollars in power dynamics he could barely comprehend. When he emerged from his bedroom dressed for work, he found Kate and Emma sitting on the living room floor, looking through one of Emma's photo albums. Kate was listening intently as Emma narrated the story of their life: Christmas mornings, birthday parties, the last vacation they'd taken with Sarah before she got too sick to travel. This is Mommy, Emma was saying, pointing to a picture of Sarah laughing at some long-forgotten joke. She was the most beautiful person in the whole world. Sorry, Kate studied the photo with the serious attention it deserved. She was very beautiful. You look just like her. Daddy says I have her smile but his stubborn streak. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Mostly good. The stubborn helps when kids at school are mean about my clothes or my lunch or whatever. But sometimes it makes Daddy frustrated when I don't want to clean my room. Mike felt his face heat up. Emma's casual mention of kids being mean about their circumstances was a reminder of how little he could hide from her. Despite his best efforts to shield her from their financial struggles, Kate glanced up at him, and Mike saw understanding in her green eyes, not pity, but recognition of how hard he worked to give Emma a good life, despite their limitations. "I have to head to the shop," Mike said, checking his watch. "Mrs. Patterson will be here around 9 to pick up Emma." "Mrs. Patterson?" Kate asked. "She watches Emma on Saturdays when I work," Mike explained. "She's a retired teacher, lives down the street. Emma helps her with her garden and learns about birds." Emma brightened. "Mrs. Patterson knows everything about birds. She has binoculars and everything. We keep a journal of all the different ones we see." Kate smiled at Emma's enthusiasm, then looked up at Mike. "What time do you usually get home?" "Depends on the day. Probably around 6. Maybe later if we get busy." Mike hesitated, unsure how to navigate the morning after etiquette of helping a stranger. Did he invite Kate to stay? Assume she'd be gone when he got home? Offer to help her figure out her next steps? Kate seemed to sense his uncertainty. "I should probably figure out where I'm going today. I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "You haven't imposed," Mike said quickly, then felt embarrassed by how eager he sounded. "I just meant, you're welcome to stay as long as you need to figure things out." "Can Kate come with us to Mrs. Patterson's?" Emma asked with the hope of someone who had clearly been planning this request. "Mrs. Patterson loves meeting new people, and she makes really good cookies." Mike looked at Kate, trying to read her expression. The offer put her in an awkward position. She could hardly say no to an 8-year-old's invitation without seeming rude, but she also had her own life to figure out. "That's very sweet," Kate said diplomatically, "but I should probably use today to make some phone calls, figure out my next steps." Emma's face fell with the disappointment of someone whose carefully laid plans had been derailed. "But you could make phone calls from Mrs. Patterson's house. She has a really good phone, and she won't listen to your conversations because she's polite." Mike suppressed a smile. Emma's logic was unassailable, even if her matchmaking was transparent. "Emma, Kate has important things to do," Mike said gently. "She can't spend her whole day entertaining us." "Actually," Kate said slowly, "if Mrs. Patterson wouldn't mind the extra company, I'd love to meet her. And Emma's right, I could make my calls from there just as easily as from anywhere else." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really, you want to come?" "I'd love to," Kate said, and Mike could tell she meant it. "As long as your father doesn't mind." Mike felt something warm and complicated settle in his chest. The practical part of him knew that Kate would probably be gone by evening, that whatever had brought her to his doorstep was a temporary disruption in both their lives. But the part of him that had been lonely for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to share small domestic moments with another adult, was already imagining coming home to find Kate and Emma still there, still part of his day. "I don't mind," he said, and realized he meant it completely. Mrs. Patterson arrived precisely at 9, as she had every Saturday for the past 2 years. She was a small, energetic woman in her 70s, with silver hair and bright blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mike had always suspected she enjoyed watching Emma as much for the company as for the $20 he paid her. And Emma adored her with the uncomplicated affection children reserve for adults who treated them like real people. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Kate," Emma announced before Mike could make proper introductions. "She's staying with us, and she wants to learn about birds." Mrs. Patterson studied Kate with the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent 40 years reading people's characters in the space of a classroom introduction. Mike found himself holding his breath, hoping Kate would pass whatever test was happening behind Mrs. Patterson's kind but assessing gaze. "Lovely to meet you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said finally, extending a hand that Kate shook with appropriate gravity. "Emma, did you tell Kate about the Cardinal family that's been visiting my feeder?" Emma launched into an enthusiastic recounting of the Cardinal saga, complete with detailed descriptions of the birds' personalities and family dynamics. Kate listened with the same attention she'd given to Emma's cooking advice, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested rather than simply being polite. Mike watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and something that might have been hope. Kate fit so naturally into their small world that it was easy to imagine her staying. Easy to picture Saturday mornings that included her presence. Easy to forget that she came from somewhere else entirely. "I'll see you tonight," Mike said to Emma, kissing the top of her head. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson." "I'm always good," Emma protested with the indignation of someone whose virtue had been unfairly questioned. "You're always spirited," Mrs. Patterson corrected with a fond smile. "Good is something you choose to be." Mike hugged Emma goodbye and found himself hesitating as he looked at Kate. In his previous life, with Sarah, morning goodbyes had included kisses and casual endearments, the easy intimacy of people who belong to each other. But Kate was a stranger, someone he'd known for less than 24 hours, and any gesture of affection would be presumptuous at best. "Have a good day," he said instead, the words feeling inadequate but safe. "You too," Kate replied, and Mike thought he detected a note of warmth in her voice that hadn't been there the night before. As Mike drove to work through Millbrook's quiet Saturday morning streets, he found his mind returning again and again to the domestic scene he'd left behind. Kate in his kitchen, wearing Sarah's robe, making pancakes with the competence of someone who knew her way around a stove despite her claims of inexperience. The easy way she'd talked to Emma, the genuine interest she'd shown in Mrs. Patterson, the grace with which she'd accepted his simple hospitality. There was something about Kate that didn't quite add up. Mike realized as he unlocked the shop and began his preparations for the day. Her clothes were expensive. Her manner suggested education and refinement, and her vague description of her work hinted at a level of success that didn't match someone who would end up on a stranger's doorstep in a rainstorm. But there was also something genuine about her, something that resonated with the part of him that had learned to recognize honesty in the midst of life's complications. She had talked to Emma like a real person, had listened to his stories about Sarah without offering empty platitudes, had accepted his help with gratitude rather than condescension. Mike's first customer arrived at 8:30, Mrs. Henderson, whose ancient Buick had been making a grinding noise that she described as somewhere between a dying cat and a garbage disposal full of rocks. As Mike popped the hood and began his diagnostic process, he found himself thinking about Kate's hands as she'd flip pancakes, the careful way she'd listened to Emma's stories, the vulnerability in her voice when she talked about leaving her engagement party. "You seem distracted today, Michael," Mrs. Henderson observed as Mike checked her brake pads. "Everything all right at home?" Mike glanced up at her, wondering how much his distraction was showing. Mrs. Henderson had taught Sunday school for 30 years and possessed the supernatural ability to read people's emotional states that came from decades of managing adolescent drama and adult secrets. "Just thinking about some things," Mike said diplomatically. "Good things or worrying things?" Mike considered the question. "Complicated things." Mrs. Henderson nodded with the wisdom of someone who understood that the best things in life were often the most complicated. "Well, complicated isn't necessarily bad. Some of the most worthwhile things start out looking complicated." As the morning progressed, Mike found himself checking his phone more often than usual, half hoping for a text from Kate, even though he realized she didn't have his number. The shop stayed busy. Saturday was always a good day for people who needed quick repairs or emergency services, but Mike's mind kept drifting to the small apartment above the garage, to Kate and Emma spending the day with Mrs. Patterson, to the possibility that Kate might still be there when he got home, around noon. Mike's phone finally did ring, but it was Emma calling from Mrs. Patterson's house. "Daddy, guess what?" Emma's voice bubbled with excitement. "Kate knows so much about birds. She helped us identify a whole family of chickadees, and she taught me how to use the binoculars properly. And Mrs. Patterson says she has excellent observational skills." Mike smiled despite himself. "That's great, sweetheart. Are you having a good time?" "The best time in Daddy." Kate made lunch, and it was really, really good. She knows how to make grilled cheese that's crispy on the outside and perfectly melted on the inside, and she cut the crusts off in a way that makes them look like flowers. Mike felt something twist in his chest, part gratitude that Kate was making Emma's day special, part longing for the kind of small domestic magic that had been missing from their lives since Sarah died. "She sounds very talented," Mike said. "She is, and Daddy, she's really nice. Like, really, really nice. Not the kind of nice that adults use when they're trying to get rid of kids, but the kind of nice that means she actually likes talking to me." Mike's throat tightened. Emma's ability to distinguish between genuine interest and polite tolerance was a skill she developed out of necessity, and her stamp of approval meant more than she could possibly know. "I'm glad you're having fun," Mike said. "I'll see you tonight." "Okay, okay, and Daddy, I hope Kate stays for dinner. Mrs. Patterson invited her, and I think she wants to say yes, but she's being polite about waiting to see if it's okay with you." Mike glanced at the clock on the shop wall. It was barely past noon, and he was already thinking about 6 o'clock, about coming home to find Kate still there, about the possibility of another shared meal around his small kitchen table. "If she wants to stay for dinner, that's fine with me," Mike said, hoping his voice sounded casual rather than eager. "Really, you mean it?" "I mean it." Emma's squeal of delight was loud enough that Mike had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I'm going to tell her right now Mrs. Patterson is making her famous pot roast, and Kate said she's never had homemade pot roast before, which Mrs. Patterson says is a crime against humanity." After Emma hung up, Mike found himself smiling as he worked, imagining Kate's reaction to Mrs. Patterson's pot roast and Emma's animated dinner conversation. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to the end of the workday, not just because it meant seeing Emma, but because it meant seeing someone else too. The afternoon passed more quickly than usual, helped along by a steady stream of customers and the pleasant distraction of anticipating the evening ahead. Mike found himself working with more energy than he'd felt in months, humming tunelessly as he changed oil and replaced brake pads and performed the 100 small repairs that kept Millbrook's aging fleet of vehicles running. Around 4 o'clock, his phone rang again. This time, the number was unfamiliar, and Mike answered with the professional courtesy he reserved for potential customers. "Davidson's Auto Repair. This is Mike." "Mr. Davidson, this is Catherine Whitman. I believe you know me as Kate." Mike felt his pulse quicken at the sound of her voice, but there was something formal in her tone that hadn't been there that morning, something that made him straighten in his chair. "Kate, hi. Is everything okay? Is Emma?" "Emma's fine," Kate said quickly. "She's helping Mrs. Patterson with something in the garden. I'm calling because I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you last night." Mike felt a chill of premonition. The formality in Kate's voice, the careful way she was choosing her words, suggested that whatever she needed to tell him was significant enough to change things between them. "Okay," Mike said carefully. "What is it?" Kate was quiet for a long moment, and Mike could hear voices in the background, Emma's laughter. Mrs. Patterson's gentle correction of some gardening technique. Normal. Domestic sounds that suddenly felt precious and fragile. "My name isn't just Catherine Whitman," Kate said finally. "It's Catherine Whitman of Whitman Enterprises. We're, we're a major real estate development company. I'm not just someone who works in real estate. Mike, I own the company. I'm what people would call a billionaire." Mike felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Billionaire. The words seemed to echo in the small space of his shop, bouncing off the walls and tools and half-finished repairs that represented his entire world. "I'm sorry," Mike said, not sure he'd heard correctly. "Did you say billionaire?" "I did." Kate's voice was steady but strained. "I inherited the company from my father when he died 5 years ago. Whitman Enterprises is worth just over $3 billion, and I own controlling interest." Mike sat down heavily on his work stool, trying to process what Kate was telling him. Billionaire. $3 billion. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, meaningless, like trying to comprehend the distance to the stars. "Why are you telling me this now?" Mike asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Because I've been lying to you, and you deserve to know the truth when I showed up at your door last night." I let you think I was just someone running from a bad relationship, but it's more complicated than that. Everything about my life is complicated in ways I didn't want to burden you with. Mike felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. What kind of complications? Kate was quiet for another moment, and Mike could hear her taking a deep breath before she continued. The man I left, Richard Blackstone, he's not just my ex-fiancé, he's a business partner, someone who's been trying to take control of my company for months. Marrying me would have given him the leverage he needed to push me out of my own business. So you left to protect your company. I left because I realized I was about to trade my entire life for the illusion of security, Kate said, and Mike could hear the emotion creeping into her voice despite her efforts to stay composed. But yes, protecting the company was part of it. There are thousands of people who work for Whitman Enterprises, people whose livelihoods depend on the decisions I make. I couldn't let Richard destroy that just because I was too scared to stand up to him. Mike tried to reconcile the woman who had made pancakes in his kitchen that morning with the image Kate was painting, a billionaire CEO responsible for thousands of employees. Someone who moved in a world of corporate boardrooms and hostile takeovers. Why didn't you tell me this last night, Mike asked. Because for the first time in years, someone was looking at me like I was just a person instead of a net worth statement, Kate said, and her voice broke slightly on the words. You didn't know who I was, and you helped me anyway. Emma talked to me like I was her friend, not someone she needed to impress. Mrs. Patterson invited me to stay for pot roast because she likes my company, not because she wants something from me. I wanted to hold on to that feeling for a little while longer. Mike felt his heart breaking and hardening at the same time. He understood Kate's desire to be seen as more than her money, but he also felt the sting of deception, the realization that the woman he'd been falling for was someone he'd never really known at all. So what happens now? Mike asked. I don't know, Kate admitted. I need to figure out what to do about Richard, about the company, about my entire life. But first, I needed to be honest with you. You've been so kind to me. Mike, you and Emma both. You deserve to know the truth. Mike stared at the wall of his shop, where he'd hung Emma's drawings next to his calendar of customer appointments. The drawings looked suddenly shabby and childish compared to the world Kate was describing. A world where $3 billion was just a number attached to someone's name. Are you still coming to dinner? Mike asked, hating how small his voice sounded. Do you want me to? Mike considered the question. Part of him wanted to say no, to protect himself and Emma from the complications that came with caring about someone whose life was so far removed from theirs. But a larger part of him, the part that had fallen asleep the night before thinking about Kate's laugh and the way she'd listened to Emma's stories, wasn't ready to let her go. Yes, Mike said finally, but Kate, no more secrets. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need to know who you really are. I understand, Kate said, and Mike could hear relief in her voice. No more secrets. I promise, after Mike hung up. He sat in his shop for a long time, staring at his hands and trying to process everything Kate had told him. Billionaire. The word felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd never learned to speak. How did someone like him, someone who counted pennies and worried about keeping the lights on, build a relationship with someone who could buy and sell his entire world without thinking twice? But then Mike remembered the way Kate had talked to Emma, the genuine interest in her voice when she'd asked about Sarah, the vulnerability in her expression when she'd admitted to never having homemade pot roast. Money might change the circumstances of someone's life, but it didn't necessarily change who they were at their core. The question was whether Mike was brave enough to find out which version of Kate Whitman was real, the billionaire CEO, or the woman who had made pancakes in his kitchen and listened to his daughter's stories like they were the most important thing in the world. As Mike locked up the shop and headed home, he realized he was about to find out. The drive from the shop to Mrs. Patterson's house took exactly 7 minutes, but it felt like the longest 7 minutes of Mike's life. His mind raced with questions he didn't know how to ask and concerns he didn't know how to voice. How did you have a relationship with someone who lived in a completely different economic universe? How did you introduce your daughter to the concept that their new friend was wealthy beyond imagination? How did you navigate the practical realities of dating someone who could solve all your financial problems with what amounted to pocket change? Patterson's house was a small, neat cottage with a garden that had been her pride and joy for 30 years. Mike could smell the pot roast before he reached the front door, and he could hear Emma's laughter floating through the open windows, along with Mrs. Patterson's gentle corrections and Kate's occasional questions about the birds they were observing. Mike knocked on the door and let himself in, a privilege earned through 2 years of Saturday evening pickups and countless small kindnesses Mrs. Patterson had shown both him and Emma. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself at him with the enthusiasm of someone whose day had been filled with discoveries. "You have to see what Kate taught me about identifying bird calls. She knows how to tell the difference between different kinds of chickadees just by listening." Mike looked over Emma's head to where Kate stood near Mrs. Patterson's kitchen window, a pair of binoculars around her neck and a field guide in her hands. She'd changed back into her own clothes, the expensive jeans and sweater she'd worn under her coat the night before, but somehow she looked more comfortable than she had in Sarah's borrowed things. "Hi," Kate said, and Mike could see uncertainty in her green eyes, as if she wasn't sure how he would react to seeing her after their phone conversation. "Hi," Mike replied, then found himself unsure what to say next. How did you greet someone who had just revealed herself to be one of the wealthiest people in the country, Mrs. Patterson, with the social grace of someone who had navigated thousands of awkward parent-teacher conferences? Stepped into the silence. "Michael, your Kate has been a delightful addition to our day. She has a real gift for bird watching, and she's been helping Emma with her observation journal." Mike felt his face heat up at Mrs. Patterson's casual use of "your Kate," but before he could correct the assumption, Emma was pulling him toward the window. "Look, Daddy Kate helped me identify 12 different species today, and she taught me how to use the binoculars so I don't get dizzy, and she knows all about migration patterns and mating behaviors and everything." Mike accepted the binoculars from Emma and peered out at Mrs. Patterson's bird feeders, where several small birds were engaged in what appeared to be a complex social hierarchy around the sunflower seeds. "That's amazing, sweetheart. Where did you learn so much about birds?" he asked Kate. Kate smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman who had made pancakes in his kitchen rather than the billionaire CEO she'd revealed herself to be. "My father used to take me bird watching when I was about Emma's age. He said it taught patience and observation skills that would serve me well in business. I think he was right. Kate's father sounds like he was very smart." Emma observed with the seriousness she brought to all discussions of parents and their wisdom. "He was," Kate agreed, and Mike caught a note of sadness in her voice that made him wonder about the story behind her inheritance of Whitman Enterprises. Mrs. Patterson called them to dinner, and they gathered around her small dining room table with its lace tablecloth and good china, the kind of formal but comfortable setting that made every meal feel like a special occasion. The pot roast was as good as Emma had promised, tender and flavorful in a way that spoke of hours of careful preparation. As they ate, Mike found himself watching Kate carefully, looking for signs of the wealthy businesswoman she'd revealed herself to be. But all he saw was someone who complimented Mrs. Patterson's cooking with genuine appreciation, who listened to Emma's stories about school with real interest, and who asked thoughtful questions about Millbrook's history and character. "Kate was telling me about some of the places she's traveled," Mrs. Patterson said as she served generous portions of apple pie for dessert. "She's been to some fascinating places." "Where's the most interesting place you've been?" Emma asked, attacking her pie with the systematic approach she brought to all desserts. Kate considered the question. "Probably a small village in Morocco where my company was helping to build sustainable housing. The people there taught me more about community and resilience than any business school ever could." Mike felt a flicker of curiosity about Kate's work beyond the raw numbers she'd shared. "What kind of sustainable housing, solar-powered homes with rainwater collection systems, and locally sourced building materials?" Kate explained. The goal was to create housing that would improve people's lives without disrupting their traditional ways of living or harming the environment. That sounds important, Emma said, pausing in her pie consumption to give Kate her full attention. It was important, Kate agreed. Some of the most important work I've ever done. Actually, much more meaningful than most of the projects that make more money. Mike heard something wistful in Kate's voice, a note that suggested her work wasn't always as fulfilling as the Moroccan housing project had been. He wondered what it was like to have the resources to tackle problems on a global scale, to be able to make decisions that affected thousands of people's lives. But he also wondered what it was like to carry that kind of responsibility, to know that your choices had consequences far beyond your own life and family. After dinner, Mrs. Patterson insisted on walking them to the door, fussing over Emma's jacket and pressing a container of leftover pot roast into Mike's hands. "You bring Kate back any time," Mrs. Patterson told Mike as they stood on her front porch. "She's good for Emma, and if I'm not mistaken, she's good for you too." Mike felt his face heat up, but before he could protest, Mrs. Patterson was hugging Emma goodbye and waving them toward Mike's truck. The drive home was quiet, Emma dozing in the back seat while Mike navigated the familiar streets of Millbrook. Kate sat beside him in the passenger seat, and Mike was acutely aware of her presence, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way the dashboard lights played across her profile, the careful way she held her hands in her lap. "Thank you for letting me stay for dinner," Kate said as Mike pulled into the driveway behind his shop. "Mrs. Patterson is wonderful, and she's special. Mike, really special." "She likes you too," Mike said, then hesitated before adding, "We both do." Kate turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the dashboard, Mike could see vulnerability in her expression that had nothing to do with money or business empires. "Even knowing what you know now?" Kate asked. Mike considered the question as he helped a sleepy Emma out of the truck and guided her up the stairs to their apartment. What did he know? Really, that Kate had more money than he could comprehend, that she ran a company he'd never heard of, that she moved in circles he could barely imagine. But he also knew that she made Emma laugh, that she listened to his stories about Sarah without trying to fix his grief, that she had walked away from security and luxury because she refused to compromise her integrity. Once Emma was tucked into bed with her teeth brushed and her stuffed animals arranged just right. Mike found Kate standing in his living room, looking at the photographs on his mantelpiece, pictures of him and Sarah and Emma through the years, captured moments of a life built on love rather than money. "You had a beautiful marriage," Kate said softly. "We did," Mike agreed, moving to stand beside her. "It wasn't perfect, but it was real." Kate nodded, still studying the photographs. "I've never had anything real like that. Every relationship I've ever been in has been complicated by who I am, what I represent. People either want something from me or they're intimidated by what I have. You're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen just me." Mike turned to face her fully. "Is that what you want, to be seen as just you?" "It's what I've wanted for so long I'd forgotten it was possible," Kate admitted. Mike felt something shift in his chest, a softening of the defenses he'd built up since Kate's phone call that afternoon. Money might change the practical realities of someone's life, but loneliness was loneliness, and the need to be truly known and accepted was universal. "So help me understand," Mike said. "If you could do anything, be anywhere, what would you choose?" Kate was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of one of the photo frames. "I think I'd choose this," she said finally. "A life where people care about you because of who you are, rather than what you can do for them. A place where Saturday dinner with neighbors is the highlight of the week. A chance to be useful in ways that matter." Mike felt his heart skip a beat. Even if it meant giving up everything else. Kate met his eyes, and Mike saw a determination there that reminded him of Emma when she'd made up her mind about something important. "Mike, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But until last night, I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly happy. I've been living in a golden cage for so long, I'd forgotten what freedom felt like. Being here, with you and Emma, helping Mrs. Patterson in her garden. Making pancakes in your kitchen, that's the most alive I've felt in years. Mike stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in Kate's green eyes, close enough to smell her perfume and feel the warmth of her presence. Kate, he said softly, I need you to understand something. I can't give you the life you're used to. I can't take you to fancy restaurants or buy you expensive gifts or offer you anything close to the luxury you've known. I'm a single father who fixes cars for a living, and some months I'm not sure I can keep the lights on. Kate's smile was soft and sad, and more beautiful than anything Mike had ever seen. And I need you to understand something. Mike Davidson, I've had all the fancy restaurants and expensive gifts money can buy, and none of it made me happy. But watching you with Emma, seeing the way you care for each other, being welcomed into your home and your life, that's worth more than anything money can buy. Mike felt something break open in his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart in the years since Sarah's death. Kate was offering him something he hadn't dared to hope for, not just her presence, but her choice to be present, her willingness to walk away from everything she'd known for the possibility of something real. What about your company? Mike asked. Your responsibilities. I've been thinking about that all day, Kate said. I have good people working for me, people who could run Whitman Enterprises without me if they had to, and there are ways to be involved without living the kind of life I've been living. I could oversee things from a distance, focus on the projects that matter most to me, use the company's resources for real good instead of just profit. Mike reached out and took Kate's hands in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite the vast differences in their backgrounds. Are you sure about this? He asked. Because once you choose this life, there's no going back to what you had before? Kate squeezed his hands, her grip firm and certain. Mike, I've been trying to go back to something I never really had in the first place. What I had before wasn't a life, it was just an existence. This, what we could build together. This is what I want to choose. Mike felt his last resistance crumble. He leaned forward and kissed Kate softly, gently, with all the tenderness and hope and possibility that had been building between them since she'd first appeared on his doorstep. When they broke apart, Kate rested her forehead against his, and Mike could feel her breathing, could see the tears of relief and joy in her eyes. So what happens now? Mike asked. Kate smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Mike had ever seen. Now we figure out how to build a life together, all three of us, from her bedroom. Emma's voice drifted through the quiet apartment. Are you guys done talking yet? Because I want Kate to read me a story. And I heard the kissing part, so I figure you must be finished with the mushy stuff. Mike and Kate looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from joy and relief, and the perfect absurdity of 8-year-old timing. We're done with the mushy stuff, Mike called back to Emma. For now, Kate added softly, just for Mike's ears, as Kate went to read Emma a bedtime story. Mike stood in his living room surrounded by photographs of his old life and the promise of something new and wonderful and completely unexpected. Outside, Millbrook settled into Saturday night quiet, but inside his small apartment, the future was just beginning to unfold. 3 weeks had passed since Kate Whitman had first appeared on Mike Davidson's doorstep, and life in Millbrook had settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. Kate had taken a room at the Millbrook Inn, the town's only hotel, a charming if modest establishment that had seen better decades, but she spent most of her time at Mike's apartment, helping with Emma's homework, learning to cook on his ancient stove, and discovering the simple pleasures of small-town life. Mike woke each morning to the sound of Kate's laughter mixing with Emma's chatter, to the smell of coffee brewing and breakfast cooking, to the domestic symphony he'd thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died. It was almost too good to be true, which was why the nagging worry in the back of his mind had grown stronger with each passing day. Kate had been making phone calls careful, quiet conversations she conducted from her hotel room or during walks around Millbrook's quiet streets. She'd assured Mike that she was handling the situation with Richard Blackstone and Whitman Enterprises, but the details remained vague, and Mike had learned not to push for information about a world he didn't understand. This particular Monday morning found Mike under the hood of Jake Morrison's pickup truck, while Kate sat on a folding chair nearby. ostensibly reading a book about sustainable architecture, but actually watching Mike work with the fascination of someone discovering a completely foreign skill set. How do you know which part is causing the problem? Kate asked as Mike probed the engine with practiced hands. Experience. Mostly, Mike said, his voice slightly muffled by the truck's hood. You learn to listen to what the engine's telling you. This one's saying the alternator's about to give up the ghost. Kate made a thoughtful noise. It's like diagnostic problem solving, but mechanical instead of financial. Mike glanced at her, still amazed by how naturally she'd adapted to spending her days in an auto repair shop. 3 weeks ago, she'd been running a billion-dollar company. Now she was learning the difference between a carburetor and a catalytic converter with the enthusiasm of a curious student. Speaking of financial, Mike said carefully, have you heard anything more from your business partner, Richard? Kate's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He's been persistent, but my lawyers are handling it. Before Mike could ask for more details, Emma burst through the door connecting the shop to their apartment, her backpack bouncing and her face bright with the excitement of someone bearing important news. Daddy Kate, guess what happened at school today? Mike straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. What happened, sweetheart? Mrs. Rodriguez said that our class is going to participate in the state science fair, and I can pick any project I want, and I want to do something about birds because Kate taught me so much about migration patterns and habitat conservation. Kate's face lit up with genuine pride. Emma, that's wonderful. What kind of bird project are you thinking about? Emma launched into an elaborate explanation of her plans, complete with charts and graphs she intended to create, and a hypothesis about how different types of bird feeders affected which species visited suburban gardens. Mike watched Kate listen to Emma's ideas with the same attention she'd probably once given to million-dollar business proposals, offering suggestions and asking questions that showed she was taking Emma's project seriously. It was moments like these that made Mike forget about the enormous differences in their backgrounds. That made him believe they could actually build a life together despite the practical impossibilities. Kate wasn't just tolerating his daughter or trying to win Mike's affection through Emma. She genuinely cared about Emma's interests, her education, her dreams. Mike's phone rang, interrupting Emma's detailed explanation of her data collection methodology. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made Mike's stomach clench with premonition. Davidson's Auto Repair. This is Mike. Mr. Davidson, this is Thomas Brennan from First National Bank of Millbrook. I'm calling because we need to discuss your account status. Mike felt the familiar cold dread that came with calls from the bank. What kind of discussion? I'd prefer to handle this in person. Mr. Davidson, would you be able to come in this afternoon, sir? Around 3 o'clock, Mike glanced at Kate, who had stopped listening to Emma's science fair plans and was watching him with growing concern. Is there a problem with my account? As I said, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. 3 o'clock. I'll be there, Mike said, then hung up with a growing sense of unease. What was that about? Kate asked quietly. Bank wants to see me. Probably about the mortgage payment I'm late on. Mike tried to keep his voice casual, but Emma had inherited Sarah's ability to read his moods, and she looked up from her backpack with worried eyes. Are we in trouble? Daddy? No, sweetheart, Mike said quickly. Just some boring grown-up stuff I need to handle. Why don't you go start your homework, and Kate and I will help you with the science fair project after dinner. Emma nodded, but Mike could see she wasn't entirely convinced. She'd learned too young to recognize the signs of financial stress, the careful way adults talked around money problems when they thought children weren't listening. After Emma disappeared upstairs, Kate moved closer to Mike. How bad is it? Mike considered lying, maintaining the pretense that everything was fine. But Kate had been honest with him about her world, and she deserved the same courtesy. Bad enough, he admitted. I'm behind on the mortgage, the shop's insurance payment, and about half the bills on my kitchen table. Jake Morrison's truck is probably going to keep me afloat for another week. Maybe 2 if I'm lucky. Kate was quiet for a moment, and Mike could practically see her mind working through calculations and possibilities. Mike, I could... No, Mike said quickly. Whatever you're thinking. No, you don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to offer to pay my bills, Mike said, and I appreciate the thought, but I can't let you do that. Kate's green eyes flashed with something that might have been frustration. Why not I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes? And you're struggling to keep your home and business. It would be nothing to me to help. That's exactly why I can't let you do it, Mike said. Because it would be nothing to you. Kate, I need to be able to take care of my own family. I need to know that what I'm building with you is based on who we are together, not on what you can fix for me. Kate stared at him for a long moment, and Mike wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Here was someone who could solve all his problems with what amounted to pocket change, and he was turning her down out of pride or principle or stubborn independence. I understand, Kate said finally, and Mike was relieved to hear that she didn't sound angry, just sad. But Mike, if you lose your home, if you lose the shop, then we'll figure out what comes next, Mike interrupted. Together. But I won't start this relationship by becoming your charity case. Kate nodded, but Mike could see the worry in her expression, the calculation of problems she could solve if only he'd let her. It was their first real conflict, the first time the vast differences in their financial situations had created tension between them. At 3 o'clock, Mike walked into First National Bank of Millbrook with the resignation of someone who knew he was about to receive bad news. The bank was small and old-fashioned, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and financial crises were handled with as much dignity as possible. Thomas Brennan was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who had been handling Mike's account since he'd first bought the shop. He gestured Mike into his office with the uncomfortable manner of someone who didn't enjoy delivering difficult news. Mike, I'll get straight to the point, Brennan said, settling behind his desk. Your mortgage payment is 60 days past due, and frankly, we're concerned about your ability to catch up. Mike nodded, having expected this conversation for weeks. I know I'm behind. Tom, business has been slow, and I've had some unexpected expenses, but I'm good for it. I just need a little more time. Brennan looked genuinely sorry as he opened a folder on his desk. I'm afraid it's more complicated than that. Mike, the bank's ownership changed last month. We were bought out by Blackstone Financial Group, and they're implementing new policies regarding delinquent accounts. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. Blackstone, Richard Blackstone, specifically, he's been very aggressive about collecting on past due accounts and foreclosing on properties that don't meet the new financial criteria. The name hit Mike like a physical blow. Richard Blackstone, Kate's ex-fiancé. The man she'd walked away from to protect her company and her integrity. The man who had somehow found his way to Millbrook and was now threatening Mike's home and business. This is about more than a late mortgage payment, isn't it? Mike asked. Brennan looked uncomfortable. Mr. Blackstone has made it clear that he considers your account a priority. He's authorized me to offer you a settlement. You can sell the property to Blackstone Financial for 60 cents on the dollar, and they'll forgive the outstanding debt. Mike felt anger building in his chest, hot and primal. And if I don't take the settlement, then we begin foreclosure proceedings immediately. Mr. Blackstone has also indicated that he plans to purchase several other properties in this area, including the building that houses Patterson's Grocery and the Millbrook Inn. The threat was clear and comprehensive. Richard Blackstone wasn't just coming after Mike. He was coming after the entire community that had welcomed Kate, the life she'd chosen over the world she'd left behind. How long do I have? Mike asked. 48 hours to accept the settlement offer. After that, the foreclosure process begins. Mike left the bank feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Richard Blackstone had found Kate, had tracked her to Millbrook, and was now systematically dismantling the life she'd built here. It was a level of vindictive calculation that Mike hadn't imagined possible, a use of wealth and power as weapons that made him feel naive for ever thinking he could protect Kate from her past. When Mike returned to the shop, he found Kate exactly where he'd left her, reading her book and occasionally glancing up to watch him work. But now her presence felt different, charged with the knowledge of what was coming for them. How bad? Kate asked, Reading his expression immediately, Mike told her about the meeting, watching her face grow pale as he explained about Blackstone Financial and the ultimatum he'd been given. When he finished, Kate was quiet for a long time, her book forgotten in her lap. "He found me," Kate said finally. "Looks that way. Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Kate stood up and began pacing the small space of the shop, her mind clearly working through possibilities and strategies. "Richard's not just trying to hurt you, Mike. He's trying to force me to come back. He knows I won't let innocent people suffer because of my choices." "So what does that mean?" Kate stopped pacing and looked at Mike with an expression that made his stomach clench. "It means I have to go back. I have to face him." "No," Mike said immediately. "That's exactly what he wants. You go back. You marry him. He gets control of your company and destroys everything you care about anyway. But if I don't go back, he destroys everything here," Kate pointed out. "Your home, your business, Mrs. Patterson's grocery store, the inn where I'm staying. He'll turn Millbrook into a ghost town just to prove he can." Mike felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. He could fight the foreclosure, spend money he didn't have on lawyers and court battles he couldn't win. He could accept defeat and walk away, taking Emma somewhere else to start over. Or he could let Kate sacrifice herself to save a town full of people she'd known for 3 weeks. "There has to be another way," Mike said. "If there is, I can't see it," Kate replied. "Richard has all the power here. He has the money, the connections, the legal authority to do exactly what he's threatening. The only thing I have is what he wants control of Whitman Enterprises," Mike wanted to argue, to find a solution that didn't require Kate to give up her freedom. But he was a mechanic from a small Ohio town, and this was a battle fought with weapons he didn't understand. That evening, the three of them sat around Mike's kitchen table picking at the dinner Kate had made, the weight of unspoken knowledge heavy in the air. Emma sensed the tension even if she didn't understand its source, and her usual dinner chatter was subdued. "Are you going away?" Emma asked Kate suddenly, the question emerging with the directness that made Mike both proud and worried about his daughter's perceptiveness. Kate's composure cracked slightly. "I might have to, sweetheart. There are some complicated grown-up problems I need to solve." "Is it because of the bad man you used to know?" Mike and Kate exchanged glances. They'd been careful not to discuss Richard in front of Emma, but children had a way of picking up on the important details even when adults tried to shield them. "Something like that," Kate said carefully. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all matters of justice and fairness. "Daddy says that bullies only win if good people don't stand up to them." "Your daddy's right," Kate said. "But sometimes standing up to bullies is more complicated than it seems. Because he's really rich and powerful." Kate looked surprised. "How did you know that?" Emma shrugged. "I heard you and Daddy talking. And Mrs. Patterson says rich people who use their money to hurt other people are the worst kind of bullies because most people can't fight back." Mike felt a surge of pride in his daughter's moral clarity, but also a deep sadness that an 8-year-old had to think about such things. Emma was growing up in a world where wealth could be wielded as a weapon, where good people could be destroyed by those with more resources and fewer scruples. After Emma went to bed, Mike and Kate sat on his couch in the dim light of the living room lamp, both lost in their own thoughts about the impossible situation they faced. "I have to call him," Kate said finally. "I have to try to negotiate something that doesn't destroy everyone I care about." Mike felt his heart clench at the phrase, "everyone I care about," but he forced himself to focus on the practical problem. "What kind of negotiation?" "I don't know yet. Maybe I can offer him something else. Some other way to get what he wants without forcing me to marry him." Mike's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer anyway. "Hello, Mr. Davidson. This is Richard Blackstone." Mike felt his blood turn to ice. Beside him, Kate went rigid as she recognized the name. "What do you want?" Mike asked. "I want to speak with Catherine. I know she's there." Mike looked at Kate, who was shaking her head frantically. "She's not, Mr. Davidson. Let's not play games. I've had investigators watching your little town for weeks. I know Catherine has been staying there, playing house with you and your daughter." It's quite touching. Really, the casual cruelty in Blackstone's voice made Mike's jaw clench with barely controlled anger. What do you want? I want Catherine to come home where she belongs, and I want you to convince her to do the smart thing. And if I don't, then you'll lose everything. Mr. Davidson, your home, your business, your daughter's school, the little old lady who runs the grocery store, all of it. I can make this town disappear, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do to stop me. Kate reached for the phone, and Mike handed it to her with reluctance. Hello, Richard, Kate said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Catherine, darling, you've led me quite a chase. What do you want? What I've always wanted, you, the company, and the life we planned together. This little adventure of yours has gone on long enough. Mike could only hear Kate's side of the conversation, but he could see the effect Richard's words were having on her, the way her shoulders tensed, the careful control she was maintaining over her emotions. I won't marry you, Richard, Kate said. That hasn't changed. Richard's laugh was audible even from Mike's position. Won't you? Even if it means your mechanic boyfriend loses his home, even if it means his daughter has to leave the only school she's ever known, even if it means destroying an entire community of innocent people? Kate was quiet for a long moment. You're despicable. I'm practical, and I'm offering you a choice. Catherine, come back voluntarily. Marry me as planned, and I'll make sure your new friends are taken care of. Their mortgages will be forgiven, their businesses will thrive, and everyone lives happily ever after. And if I refuse, then I destroy everything you've grown to care about, piece by piece, until you have no choice but to come crawling back anyway. Either way, I get what I want, but this way, the collateral damage is minimized. Mike watched Kate close her eyes, and he could see her calculating the costs of resistance versus surrender. It was exactly the kind of impossible choice Richard had designed: surrender her freedom to save innocent people, or maintain her independence while watching those she cared about suffer. I need time to think, Kate said. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I begin foreclosure proceedings, and I start buying up every piece of property in Millbrook that's for sale. I can turn your little paradise into a ghost town. Catherine, don't test me. The line went dead, and Kate stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down with hands that shook slightly. He's really going to do it, Kate said. He's going to destroy everything. Mike pulled Kate into his arms, feeling her trembling against his chest. We'll figure something out. How? Kate asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. He has all the power, all the resources. I can't fight him without becoming exactly the kind of person I was trying to escape. Mike held her tighter, trying to offer comfort he didn't feel. Richard Blackstone had created a perfect trap. Kate could save the people she cared about only by sacrificing herself. Or she could maintain her freedom only by watching innocent people pay the price for her choices. It was then that Mike remembered something Emma had said at dinner. Bullies only win if good people don't stand up to them. Maybe the answer wasn't about fighting Richard Blackstone on his terms, but about changing the terms entirely. Kate, Mike said slowly, what if we don't play his game? Kate pulled back to look at him. What do you mean, I mean? What if instead of choosing between your freedom and protecting us, we found a way to do both? Kate shook her head. Mike, you don't understand the kind of power Richard has. He can destroy businesses, foreclose on properties, manipulate local governments. But he can't destroy something that doesn't exist in the way he thinks it does. Mike interrupted. He's threatening our homes, our businesses, our community. But what if we don't need those things in the way he assumes we do? Kate stared at him, not following his logic. I don't understand. Mike was still working through the idea himself, but something was crystallizing in his mind, a possibility that Richard Blackstone hadn't anticipated because it required thinking beyond the conventional definitions of victory and defeat. What if we just left, Mike said. Not just you, but all of us. What if we took everything that really matters, the people, the relationships, the community itself, and moved somewhere? Richard can't touch us. Kate blinked. You're talking about abandoning Millbrook. I'm talking about saving what's actually important, Mike said. Buildings can be replaced, businesses can be rebuilt, but the people, the connections we've made, that's what Richard's really trying to destroy. He wants to isolate you, make you feel like you have no choice but to go back to him. But what if you do have choices? What if we all do? Kate was quiet for a long moment, and Mike could see her mind working through the implications of what he was suggesting. It wasn't a conventional solution. It would mean giving up everything they'd built in Millbrook, starting over somewhere else with no guarantees of success, but it would also mean staying together, maintaining their freedom, and refusing to let Richard Blackstone's manipulation tear apart the family and community they'd created. Where would we go? Kate asked. I don't know yet, Mike admitted. But Kate, you have resources. Not just money, but connections, knowledge, experience in building things from the ground up. And we have each other, me, you, Emma, Mrs. Patterson, the other people in town who might want a fresh start. We could build something new, something Richard can't touch. Kate's eyes were bright with tears, but Mike thought he saw hope there too. You would do that. Give up everything you've built here. Kate, everything I care about is in this room with me right now. Mike said, the shop, the apartment, even the town, they're just places. You and Emma. The life we're building together, that's what matters. Kate kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and full of gratitude and love. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. It's crazy, she said. Maybe, but it's our kind of crazy. Kate smiled, and Mike saw determination replacing despair in her expression. I need to make some phone calls. There are people who might be interested in this kind of relocation project. As Kate reached for her phone, Mike felt something shift in his chest, not fear or resignation, but anticipation. Richard Blackstone thought he held all the cards, but he hadn't counted on the possibility that Kate and Mike might simply refuse to play the game he designed. They were about to show him that love and community were more powerful than money and manipulation, and that sometimes the best way to win was to change the rules entirely. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with a kind of overcast sky that made Millbrook look tired and worn around the edges. Mike woke to find Kate already dressed and on her phone, speaking in the crisp, professional tone he'd rarely heard from her during their time together. Yes, I understand the timeline, Kate was saying, but I need the preliminary surveys completed by this afternoon, and I need to know about zoning regulations and local building codes. No, money isn't an issue. Speed is what matters. Mike made coffee and listened to Kate coordinate what sounded like a complex business operation, marveling at the transformation from the woman who'd made pancakes in his kitchen to the billionaire CEO who could apparently mobilize teams of professionals with a few phone calls. Emma appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Is Kate buying something? She asked. Something like that, Mike said, not sure how to explain what Kate was actually doing. When Kate finished her call, she sat down at the kitchen table with Mike and Emma, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I've been thinking about what you said last night, Kate told Mike, about creating something new, somewhere Richard can't reach us. And, Mike prompted, and I think I found the perfect place. Kate pulled out her phone and showed them a series of photographs rolling hills covered in green grass, a small river winding through farmland, mountains visible in the distance. It's in Montana, about 300 acres of undeveloped land near a town called Cedar Falls. Population 800, closest city 2 hours away. Mike studied the photos, trying to imagine building a life in such a remote place. What's the plan? The plan is to create a real community, Kate said, her voice gaining energy as she spoke. Not just houses, but a place where people can live and work and thrive together. Sustainable housing, local businesses, a school, medical facilities, everything we'd need to be self-sufficient. Emma looked up from her cereal. Like our own town. Exactly like our own town, Kate confirmed. A place where people matter more than money, where families can grow up safe and happy without worrying about billionaires trying to destroy their lives? Mike felt a flicker of possibility, but also concern about the practical realities. Kate, something like that would cost millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions. I have tens of millions of dollars, Kate pointed out. And I have something more important. I have people I trust to help me build it right. Before Mike could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas Brennan's number, and Mike's stomach clenched as he remembered the deadline Richard had given them. "It's the bank," Mike told Kate. "Don't answer it," Kate said. "Not yet. I have one more call to make first." Kate dialed a number and waited, her expression tense. "Richard, it's Catherine." "Yes, I've made my decision. No, I won't be coming back to New York, and I won't be marrying you because I have a better offer." Mike could hear Richard's voice rising on the other end of the line, but Kate continued speaking with calm determination. "I'm offering to buy out your interest in Blackstone Financial. Richard, all of it, for twice what you paid for the Millbrook Bank and every other property you've acquired in the last month. No, this isn't a negotiation. This is a one-time offer. You can walk away with a substantial profit, or you can try to fight a legal battle against Whitman Enterprises' entire legal department. You have 1 hour to decide." Kate ended the call and looked at Mike with a smile that was equal parts nervous and triumphant. "That was either very smart or very stupid," Mike observed. "Probably both," Kate admitted. "But Richard's not the only one who can use money as a weapon. The difference is, I'm using it to protect people instead of hurt them." Emma had been listening to the conversation with the intense focus she brought to all adult drama that might affect her life. "Does this mean we're not in trouble anymore?" "It means we have choices," Kate said. "We can stay here and rebuild, or we can start somewhere new. But either way, we do it together." Mike's phone rang again. "Brennan at the bank." This time, Mike answered. "Mike, I just got a very interesting call from Richard Blackstone's lawyers," Brennan said without preamble. "It seems someone has made an offer to buy out Blackstone Financial's interest in our bank." "Is that so?" Mike tried to keep his voice neutral. "A very generous offer. Actually, if it goes through, all the foreclosure proceedings would be suspended, and we'd return to our previous ownership and policies." Mike looked at Kate, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. "And if it doesn't go through, then we proceed as planned. But Mike, between you and me, I hope this deal works out. I never liked being forced to foreclose on good people." After Mike hung up, the three of them sat in silence for a moment, processing the possibility that Kate's gambit might actually work. "What happens if Richard says no?" Mike asked. "Then we go to Montana anyway," Kate said. "We take everyone who wants to come, Mrs. Patterson, the Hendersons, anyone else who's tired of being at the mercy of people like Richard Blackstone. We build something better." Emma clapped her hands with delight. "Can we really do that? Just move everyone to a new place?" "We can try," Kate said. "People have done it before. Your ancestors probably came to Ohio looking for a better life. This would be the same thing, just with better planning and more resources." Mike felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about the future, hope for possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. Whether they stayed in Millbrook or built something new in Montana, they would do it together, as a family and a community. Kate's phone rang, and she answered it with visible tension. "Richard, I see. Yes, I understand. The transfer will be completed by close of business today." When Kate ended the call, she was smiling. "He took the offer. Blackstone Financial is selling all their Millbrook properties back to the original owners, and Richard is walking away with a profit that should keep him happy for a while." Mike felt a wave of relief so intense it made him dizzy. "So we can stay, or we can go, or we can split our time between here and Montana." Kate said, "The important thing is that we get to choose." Emma threw her arms around Kate's neck. "You saved our house." "We all saved it," Kate corrected, hugging Emma back. "By refusing to let bullies win." That evening, Mike found himself standing in his shop, looking around at the familiar tools and equipment that had defined his working life for so many years. Kate was beside him, and Emma was upstairs doing homework with the focused determination of someone whose world had been saved. "Any regrets?" Mike asked Kate. "About spending millions of dollars to defeat my ex-fiance's revenge scheme?" Kate considered the question. "Not a single one. Best money I ever spent." Mike pulled Kate into his arms, marveling at how right it felt to hold her, how perfectly she fit into his life and his future. "What now?" "Now we build something beautiful," Kate said. "Here, in Montana, wherever we want. We have all the time in the world and all the resources we need. The only question is what we want to create together." Mike kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Kate Whitman." "I love you too, Mike Davidson. All of you, you and Emma, and this little town, and the life we're going to build together." From upstairs, Emma's voice drifted down. "Are you guys being mushy again? Because I finished my homework, and I want to show Kate my science fair project." Mike and Kate laughed, the sound echoing through the shop and mixing with the evening sounds of Millbrook settling into peaceful night. Outside, the town continued its quiet existence, unaware of how close it had come to destruction and how thoroughly it had been saved by love and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that money was more powerful than community. 6 months later, Mike stood in the kitchen of their new house, not in Montana, though Kate had kept the land there as a possible future project, but in a beautiful home on the outskirts of Millbrook, built with sustainable materials and powered by solar panels and designed with Emma's input on everything, from the color of her bedroom walls to the placement of the bird feeders in the garden. Kate was at the stove, making pancakes with the confidence of someone who had truly mastered the art, while Emma set the table with the precision of a military operation. It was Saturday morning, and Mrs. Patterson would be arriving soon for their weekly family breakfast, followed by a community meeting to discuss the new library Kate was funding and the small business loans she was providing to help local entrepreneurs. Mike's phone rang a customer whose car had broken down on the highway outside town. It was the kind of call that would once have filled him with stress about whether he could afford to turn down the work or whether he had time to fit in another job. Now, it was simply an opportunity to help someone who needed assistance. "I'll be back in a couple of hours," Mike told Kate, kissing her goodbye with the easy affection of people who knew they had all the time in the world. "We'll save you some pancakes," Kate promised, and Mike could hear the contentment in her voice, the deep satisfaction of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. As Mike drove toward the stranded motorist, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from Kate's appearance on his doorstep during a storm to the battle with Richard Blackstone, to the life they were building together now. It hadn't been easy or simple or without complications, but it had been real in a way that transcended money or status or any of the external measures of success the world might use. They had chosen each other, and they had chosen a life built on love and community, and the belief that good people taking care of each other was more powerful than any amount of wealth or influence. It was a radical idea in a world obsessed with individual achievement and financial accumulation. But it was working. Mike helped the stranded motorist, a young woman traveling to visit her grandmother, and refused payment for the simple repair, instead giving her directions to Mrs. Patterson's store for coffee and pie. As he drove home, Mike realized that this was what Kate had given him: not just love, though that was certainly part of it, but the freedom to be generous, to help others without calculating the cost, to live according to his values rather than his fears. When Mike returned home, he found Kate and Emma in the garden, working together to plant a new flower bed that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds. Emma was explaining her theory about which colors would be most appealing to different species, while Kate listened with the serious attention of someone receiving critical scientific information. "How's the garden coming?" Mike asked, joining them in the rich, dark soil Kate had imported to replace the clay that had previously dominated their yard. "Emma thinks we need more purple flowers," Kate reported. "Something about the wavelength of light being particularly attractive to certain butterfly species." "Emma's usually right about these things," Mike said, earning a grin from his daughter, as they worked together in the warm spring sunshine. Mike reflected on the life they'd created, not perfect, but real and honest and full of the kind of small daily joys that added up to something greater than the sum of their parts. Kate had given up the kind of wealth that most people could only dream of, but she'd gained something more valuable: a family, a community, a purpose that went beyond profit margins and stock prices. Mike, Kate said, interrupting his thoughts. Yeah, I've been thinking about the Montana property again. Not for us, but for other people who might need what we found here. People running from situations like mine, or families struggling like you were. What if we created a program to help them start over? Mike looked at Kate, seeing the familiar gleam in her eyes that appeared whenever she was planning something ambitious and generous. You want to build a whole network of communities. I want to prove that there's another way to live, Kate said. That people don't have to choose between financial security and personal happiness. That communities can take care of their own. That love and kindness and mutual support are actually practical solutions to real problems. Emma looked up from her planting. Like what we did with Mr. Blackstone. Exactly like what we did with Mr. Blackstone, Kate confirmed. But bigger. Mike felt the familiar thrill of possibility that Kate's dreams always inspired in him. How big are we talking? As big as we can manage, Kate said. I have the resources, you have the practical skills, and Emma has the moral clarity to keep us focused on what really matters. Between the three of us, I think we can change the world. Mike kissed Kate's dirt-smudged cheek, tasting earth and sunshine and the sweetness of shared dreams. Then let's change the world. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that Emma immediately began planning to incorporate into her butterfly garden. The three of them continued their work in comfortable silence. They were building something beautiful, not just a garden, but a life, a family, a vision of how the world could be if people chose love over fear, community over isolation, generosity over greed. It was, Mike realized, exactly the kind of crazy, impossible, wonderful dream that was worth spending a lifetime making real, and they had all the time in the world to do it. 6 months after that terrifying phone call. Mike Davidson stands in his new kitchen, watching Kate flip pancakes while Emma chatters about her latest science project. The morning light streams through windows of a home built not just with sustainable materials, but with dreams that refuse to die under pressure. They paid a price for this happiness. Kate walked away from a world of limitless luxury, choosing love over security. Mike risked everything he'd built as a single father, betting his daughter's future on a woman who appeared in a storm. And Emma, she learned earlier than most children that sometimes the people you love have to fight battles you can't fully understand. But what they gained was immeasurable. A billionaire discovered that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. A struggling mechanic found that love doesn't require rescue, it requires partnership. And a little girl learned that families aren't just born, they're chosen, fought for, and built one small act of kindness at a time. The real victory wasn't defeating Richard Blackstone or saving their town. It was proving that in a world obsessed with power and money, the simple act of choosing each other can still change everything. What price would you pay for a love that transforms your entire world?